Good morning, everybody. And I don't know if he's still around, but thank you, Tia, for the amazing presentation. It's hard to top that, so I'm going to try and do my best. I'm also kind of intimidated because I spend my life and my days talking to scientists, reading what they write, listening to what they say. And this is one of the rare occasions when I get to talk back to scientists, and I feel like I'm not worthy. I'm not entitled to talk to you guys because most of the time I'm in awe and I'm inspired and I'm humbled by the amazing things that scientists do. But like I said, thank you for sharing this time with me, and let's have some fun. I'm gonna try and let me see if you can get this.
Yes, we can see the screen, Dario.
Okay, good. Good. Quo is a popular science magazine, and I know that that raises some doubts. But I'm also a firm believer that science needs to be popular. And some of the things that we have been living in the past few years, I think, come from the fact that science has become unpopular. Let me tell you a little story. When I was a kid, a friend of my parents, an American engineer, came to visit, and he told me this story. He said, a mathematician builds a bridge, and the bridge collapses. But the mathematician doesn't know why the bridge has collapsed. So a physicist tries to build a bridge, and the bridge collapses. But the physicist knows exactly why the bridge collapsed. Then an engineer comes and builds a bridge, and the bridge doesn't collapse. The bridge stands. But the engineer hasn't got the slightest idea why the bridge is standing. And I was a teenager, and I thought to myself, well, that is cool. I want to be that guy. I want to be the engineer. But then something happened. And the thing that happened is that this guy came on national TV at the time where I was a teenager. Carl Sagan published a book called Cosmos. And you probably will hear about him today more times. So I'm not going to extend my introduction of him. But he presented not only the why things happen, but the how and the what through stories. He would tell the story of the great library of Alexandria and all the knowledge that was in there and how it was tragically lost. He would tell the story of how Eratosthenes calculated with accuracy the circumference of the Earth more than 2 millennia ago with nothing but his brain and a yardstick. He would tell the story of the Miller-Urey experiment where they took basic chemical elements that were present in the primordial soup, the early Earth's atmosphere, and added some electricity and ended up with amino acids, the building bricks of life. He told the story of the trial of Galileo that was the first attempt to put us where we belong, not at the center of the universe, but in a very distant suburb. And he also suggested that at one point, the Voyager probe, as it was living the solar system turn its cameras towards the Earth and take a picture from there. And this picture was foundational to science communication, because the pale blue dot photograph, as it's called, gave us a sense of our place in the universe, a little speck of rock in the immensity of space. And ever since I watched Carl Sagan's Cosmos, I couldn't look up at the sky without feeling something, without feeling chills running down my spine, without feeling short of breath, without feeling very small in front of this whole unfathomable universe. That thing that I was feeling is called awe. And awe is a self-transcendent feeling. Awe is what happens when we leave our body, we shift our attention away from ourselves. Awe is what makes us feel like we are small and part of something bigger than ourselves. And it's also something that makes us more generous and more connected to others. And fortunately, most of the time that we listen to other people talk about awe, they use it in the context of awesome. And awesome is a word that through Maisie overuse has lost its meaning, because everything can be awesome. It could be a car, it could be a dog, it could be a donut. And when everything is awesome, nothing really is. But what I wanted to share with you today is that in my work as a science communicator, I'm dedicated to inspiring that feeling of awe in other people. I'm trying to put in the brains of the people who listen to me the same chills, the same sense of wonder that I experienced as a kid. But what is awe anyway? Is there
Dario, we can't hear you. You have muted your micro, I think. I see your micro muted.
Yes, we
okay?
can't hear you.
You can hear
now
me now?
It's back. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, was that from the beginning or just the last couple of slides?
Just now.
1 minute, 30 seconds.
Okay, well, sorry about that, fat fingers. I was just going through this list and probably pushed the wrong button. Well, Jason Silva says that awe is an experience of such perceptual vastness that you have to reconfigure your mental models of the world to assimilate it. And although he is not a scientist, he is not so far off from what science says. This is the landmark study on awe, on the emotion of awe by Kellner and Hyatt. And what they say is that awe is the inability to assimilate an experience into current mental structures. It is something that in order to understand, we need to think differently. And they also talk about what they call the flavors of awe, the things that can inspire awe in other people. We have the sense of threat, that something is an existential risk for us. Beauty can inspire awe, exceptional ability, virtue in the experience of the supernatural. And these are the technologies of awe that we're all familiar with. Every time we listen to that song that we love in the car and we start crying, every time we go to a concert and feel like we are not there, we are elevated. Every time that we see a performance by Cirque du Soleil and the whole world disappears and it's only the performer and his or her ability. Every time we experience this trance by witnessing a work of art, And we wonder because we are transported by the expression of the artist. Every time we experience something vast that belittles us, that makes us feel smaller in the presence of something enormous. And the combination of all these things. But there's one technology of all that I think is the most useful to us. And I also think that this technology of all is the one that gave birth to all the other flavors of all. And this is stories. We are social creatures, and we didn't survive because we have inherited traits. We didn't survive because we evolved strength or claws or teeth or speed. Actually, our inherited traits kind of suck. Most of them have devolved. We are not very strong. We're not very fast. Our teeth are not very useful. Instead, we survived by learned skills. And a condition of those learned skills is that they pass from one generation to the next. And the way that we pass those skills to the next generation is through stories. So much so that stories have their own brain circuitry, that there's a part in our brains dedicated to creating, interpreting, and remembering stories. Those stories need to be coherent. We are not very good at remembering numbers. There's a reason why most numbers, telephone numbers, were 7 figures. And the reason is that our brain can't hold much more than that. But then we have memory champions who can remember series of hundreds of numbers. Without fail, they can recall exactly the next number. But there's a method, and the method, so they say, is to assign numbers to letters, letters to words, and to create a story using those words. When they recall the numbers, they are not thinking about numbers, they're thinking about the story. And there's one trick of the trade that says, the crazier the story, the better. So why crazy? Well, because stories in many ways predate language. We were telling stories before we had words. We communicated stories through gestures and sounds and paintings or drawings on the sand. And most likely, those stories didn't deal with information. They were not telling us exact data. They were conveying emotions. Emotions that were necessary to learn and to remember. And this has been increasingly become apparent and supported by evidence. For the longest time, psychology has dealt with the separation of the emotional and the logical brain. But there's a lot of evidence that tells us that we need emotion for cognition, that emotional perceptions are part of the cycle that creates cognition. So much so that elderly people who have impaired cognitive abilities, they still have their emotional circuitry intact. And in some cases, it gets better. They get better at communicating and recognizing emotions. We also know that people who suffer from depression have a malfunctioning emotional circuitry. And in those cases, when that circuit is impaired or damaged, there's also, not surprisingly, trouble learning and remembering. Emotion is also a part of how we learn and how we create our identity. Most cultures in the world have rites of passage. And rites of passage are experiences of great emotional intensity. Teenagers are left in the wild, in darkness, at great heights, extreme heat, extreme cold, even with the use of psychotropic substances in some cases. And all those, or even pain. There are some rituals that have to do with pain. And that is a way to instill an indelible, a memory, a learning that we will keep for the rest of our lives. We know that the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, and the secretion of adrenaline enhance learning and memory. But I have no literature to support this, but my contention is that maybe emotion is an integral part of the rest of the mental processes of how we communicate and how we learn and how we teach. So in a way, I find it a great contradiction and a great shame that our education system hasn't really changed in over 2 centuries and is based in rote memorization of facts. Somebody speaks and we absorb large quantities of data, or we are supposed to absorb it. And we are also supposed to leave our emotions at the door. But how can you leave an integral part of what makes you learn at the place where you need to be learning? Can you tell me what teachers do you remember from your primary school? I remember the ones who left an impression on me through their personality, the ones that communicated emotions, the ones who tell the funniest jokes, the ones who made me feel that feeling of awe. But we all know that telling the funniest jokes is not a guarantee that our message is going to get through. Every comedian knows that no matter how good the joke is, if you don't connect with the audience, it's not going to work. It's not going to get through. And we are suffering from that. And Theo gave very good examples of what we are going through as a society, as a species at this moment, because the important stories are boring. And the fake stories are fascinating. This poor guy was convinced that he was saving people by storming the Capitol because the members of the Democratic Party, and Hillary Clinton in particular, were reptilians, were lizard people who drank the blood of babies and conducted satanic rituals. And we also know that this is a virus and that this is a zoonotic infection that originated in wild animals or from animal products and somehow crossed over to humans and mutated. So it was able to infect human cells and became easily transmittable through aerosols. That's a story that we know, but we can also think that, and also we know that the vaccine was developed in record time using the cutting edge technologies that we have at our disposal and through the investment of huge amounts of money and resources, and that it doesn't protect from the virus, but lowers the mortality rate, especially in very vulnerable people, which is the main objective. This story is true, but it's boring. It's better to think that Bill Gates commanded a secret lab in China, so that where the virus was created, so he could make billions from vaccines. And at the same time, with the vaccine, they will inoculate us with nanochips that will control people's minds through the use of 5G antennae. But wait for it, because the virus really doesn't exist. There's only the microchip. And it's a plan to end individual freedom and makes us into slaves. And that plan is by the government, who, by the way, are lizard people. Seriously, we can't compete. That is an amazing story. That story checks all the boxes. That story instills all the right emotions to be remembered, to be transmitted. That story is the real virus. And I'm going to be self-deprecating. Most of the time, the media are not doing it better. There's some media outlets who are, in some cases, irresponsible, and in most cases, inaccurate. Do you like to wind down with a gin tonic? I don't drink hard liquor, but some people enjoy it just to get back home after a hard day's work and have a little drink. Well, then you're a psychopath. And that's what science says. I'm not making this up. This appeared in The Tabs, a UK online magazine. So people who like gin are massive psychopaths, according to scientists. Let's take a look at what the scientists actually said. Individual differences in bitter taste preferences are associated with antisocial personality traits. So, yeah, you're not a psychopath. If you are one, it's more likely that you like bitter flavors. But drinking gin doesn't make you a psychopath. Science communication has a language problem, because the language of science is data, facts. But the language of human beings is emotion. I'm sure you're familiar with Nobel Prize laureate Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he came up with a metaphor. Some people think this is literal, this is not literal, and it's just an apt metaphor to explain processes. He said that there's two circuits in our brain. They're not actual circuits, but maybe processing paths. One is fast, is parallel, is automatic, is slow learning, is the system one. It's the system that makes us reach a quick conclusion about someone or make a fast decision about something. It's the system that makes us run when see danger. And then we have system two. That's slow, it's not parallel, it's serial, one thing after the next, it's control. We need to make an effort to use it. It's something that takes energy from us, and it's also flexible. So when we think about how we make decisions and how we use these systems, we may think, well, let's think about how politicians make decisions and what decisions based on evidence take into account. And I'm not saying that politicians don't. Probably politicians also use system one and think about the results of a certain policy or measure, and they think about the probability that it is going to work. But we, at the level of system two, we stop there. Results and probability is going to drive my decision because this has been proven to work most of the time. But political decisions have a lot of other things in common, into account. Conflicted interests, stakeholders, what's the social environment? How am I going to be held accountable for this decision? In the end, the political decision is driven by how am I going to feel? How are other people going to feel? And mostly, are they going to feel like re-electing me? And all that is system 2. All of that is fast and not slow. And then another scientist, computer scientist, came up with a fantastic discovery. They created an emotion amplifier. And I'm sure that it wasn't intended like that. They were creating something to make money, not to make people angry. But the side effect is that social media make people angry and become anti-social media. And that's a problem because most of the people are getting their information from social media. This is from a couple of years, from 2019. So the figures have probably increased globally. At least I know for a fact that in Spain, the percentage of people that are getting their news from social media is even greater than that. And it's also greater in younger people. And the thing about social media is that false information travels faster, for longer, deeply than true facts. And this has been measured on Twitter. This is a paper about how false information spreads through Twitter. And we may ask ourselves why, and it's because of emotions. The Wall Street Journal published the Facebook Files, a series of internal reports that showed that in 2018, they tried to see what was going on with Facebook. Why were people spreading false information? Why were people getting angrier when they were using the social network? And the results were that the algorithm selected for it. The algorithm didn't select for truthfulness or utility. It selected for the things that made people engaged, that made people spend more time looking at their screens. And the side effect of that is that it boosted negative emotions. And the big scandal is that Mark Zuckerberg knew about this and refused to change it because, well, it makes them a lot of money. Also, I don't know if you've heard about Ancient Apocalypse, a show on Netflix that became very popular that basically tried to prove scientifically that there was a very advanced civilization that predated the discovery of agriculture. And that civilization disappeared due to a cataclysm. The outrage was so, by real anthropologists, was so loud that this series that was in documentaries, now you can find it in science fiction. So what can we do? What can we do as scientists against this machinery that's spreading stories, spreading the wrong stories? And the task at hand is urgent because we are running out of time, because climate change is real. The only solution that I consider is being able to tell better stories. I'm going to pass through this. I'm going to recommend you watch this video by Kurt Vonnegut, an American author that created graphs to show the shapes of stories through time. So this is good fortune, ill fortune. And this is a simple story, man in a hole. Oh, sorry. A guy is very happy, loses everything, and recovers it in the end. But you may be wondering, well, I'm a scientist. What I'm studying is not fun, it's not engaging, it's not a story. What can I do with my paper? What can I do for non-resonant Higgs boson pair production? And how do I make this into a story? Well, you have to learn how to make a sandwich. You have a big, chunky piece of meat, the meat of your communication story, the data. And that is very hard to bite. So you need to cover it with slices of fluffy, tender, yummy emotion. You start with emotion. You start by connecting with the people who are listening to you. You tell the story about this little kid who was going to lose his vision because of a rare genetic disorder. And then you explain how gene editing therapy works and how through the use of viral vectors, you can put the right genes in the cells of the kid's eye, of the person who suffers from this disease, and make them recover the vision. And you end up with emotion. You tell the story about how the little kid recovered from his genetic disease to make it memorable, to make people remember. Emotion is not only about the story you tell, it's only about who you are. People perceive when we are passionate about things, when we are enthusiastic, and when we like what we do. So it doesn't pay to be very fastidious and to care about all the little details. I think, and this is controversial, I think it's better to point people in the right direction, even if they get some details wrong, than to lose them completely and have them go in the opposite direction. And you also have to bear in mind that people have a limited space for stuff in their brains, and they are only going to remember 3 things about your talk. And those 3 things may be the color of your shirt, or it may be the joke that you told and not what you wanted to communicate. Very quickly, I'm going to give you keys to use to communicate with emotion. First, make it human. Make it about the people who are actually doing the work. Make them into heroes. Make them into people who experience emotions, who love what they do and love other people. Make it visual. Images have an immense power to elicit emotions. Make comparisons, metaphor, talk about size. Try to make people visualize the size of things, because size is one of the main ways that we are intimidated or attracted or in awe of something. Make it a mystery, like the question mark galaxy formation that was discovered a little bit. What is this about? People wonder, make questions, want to know. Make it a surprise. Who would know that wasps have faces and they recognize each other? And we are capable of recognizing individual wasps by their facial traits. Make it transcendence. Talk about things like the God spot in the brain and how this has been studied for years, and it's not anywhere, but they're very close to find it. Use the whole range of emotions, but my plea to you is use the emotion of awe. It's very easy to attract people with anger or with jokes or with joy, but awe has other effects. The experience of awe probably evolved from our need to be in open spaces to protect ourselves. And the immensity of things is what triggers the emotion and awe in us. Being in nature, anything that has to do with the natural world can inspire awe. Even microscopic things, because we can't see them, are there to inspire awe in the people who finally understand that there are things that the eye can't see, and they're important. Threat, this is the tongue eruption from space. Think about the immensity. Think about how you feel if that happened to you, if you were there. Think cultural diversity, exposing ourselves to things that are outside of our common day experience, also are tools to inspire awe. And ultimately, let's make it a little bit about ourselves and about the quest, about the quest of science. Let's take ourselves out of the picture and focus on what's bigger than us. Like Carl Sagan once said, understanding is a kind of ecstasy. So think about sharing that joy, that ecstasy, that feeling of awe with other people. Thank you so much, and thank you for putting up with me because that ran a little bit over the time, but I welcome your questions. Yes.
There are two hands.
Fodis. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yes.
So I had a question around emotion. So usually when we see a lot of pieces of misinformation, they also employ emotion in order to get the attention of people. So I think there's a little bit of a fine line in terms of using emotion and abusing emotion when trying to make make information count rather than make your personal opinion count. Where would you put that line? Like, how would you be able to say that this is a good use of emotion and it kind of helps the person identify with the situation and the data and the type of thing that I want them to identify with? And when would you say that it's an abuse of emotion, that like I'm using that person's not just mental state but emotional state to manipulate them?
Well, the line is very clear to anyone who uses social media and anyone who listens to political debate. But I think that we can tell now the difference between those emotions, and that's why I focused on using the right kind of emotions. Emotion is inevitable. It's not optional, and every time you're communicating, you are going to elicit some kind of emotion or other. So you better try and instill the right kind of emotions. And that's why I think the complex emotion of awe that is adaptive, that makes us better people, that makes us more open to others, is better than using fear or using pity or using anger as an emotion to get a message across. I don't know if I answer your question, but that's what I would do.
Great, thanks.
Inma.
Hi, Dario. Well, it was awesome listening to you because recently I was listening to a psychologist, a Spaniard one, by the way, talking about how emotions remember. And, you know, when in situations of panic or trauma, we don't remember what happened, but we can feel them again. So I think it's very connected. So I've got, the first thing is a very short question regarding to the graphs that you were showing about this type of stories. I don't know if the reference is in your slides, but I would be very happy to I would like to you know, to read that or to listen that. And then just also a very small reflection of what you were saying. So you were talking about the what, the storytelling, but also the how we tell that story. And, you know, being a social scientist, because I'm studying, you know, academic entrepreneurship and knowledge transfer and all those things. And again, I see a tendency to, which I think is normal, right? But material things are more prominent. In fact, all the things or the tips or most of the tips that you were saying, like, you know, size, maybe mystery, not so much, but they are related to material things. So I think that also, or in my case, you know, I was reflecting on how I'm going to deliver my message to students, but I think that also showing passion in my case is very important because I don't have material things to show to kids, right? Because precisely I'm talking about things that are not observable in a material world, you know? And I think that's even more difficult for people like me. I mean, in the sense, I cannot get a molecule and, show a nice picture and compare engagement or academic, entrepreneurship between one or the other. And yeah, it's just a reflection about how the material world dominates. And I think it's a pity in all the things that I'm looking at. Yeah, just a comment. I don't know if there is some tips that you can give us to, social scientists, maybe humanities, to make science communication better, in the sense that the message gets really, so that people get the message. Yeah.
Well, regarding the reference, yes, you're going to have it in my slides. And the title of the story, just search for it and you'll find it. The Spread of True and False News Online. So it's very easy to find. And I couldn't agree more with you. I think that, yes, one of the problems of science, and it's one of the things that I referred to, is language. And the language of science is very focused on data and on tangible things. But like I said, emotion is inevitable. So let's try and learn that language and control that part of the communication process. So thank you for that. Yes. And I think also that social scientists have it much easier than, I don't know, quantum physicists. You're talking about people, and people can relate more easily to people. So be grateful.
Okay, I'll buy that, but only for a while.
Okay.
More questions to Dario? Okay, so thank you very much, Dario. Do you want to tell us something else?
No, I only want to extend my thanks. Thank you for listening to me and my rambling. And I would have loved to hear more from you, but I'm going to stick around and listen to all of you. So thank you again.